I took the janitor job at Lincoln Middle because it paid well, and I needed the money. Sure, it was creepy being in an abandoned school at night, but I figured it was just my imagination getting the better of me. Until the second week. I was mopping the cafeteria floor when I heard the first sound. A faint scraping like a chair being dragged across the tiles. I called out, but no one answered. I walked over to the source of the noise, only to find a single chair sitting in the middle of the room. It hadn't been there before. I gathered all my courage and started cleaning up that classroom when the intercom started crackling to life. "Mr. Peters, please report to the principal's office," a voice said. My heart stopped. No one else was in the building, and the intercom system wasn't supposed to work. But the voice had been clear, almost smug. I hesitated, staring at the intercom. The building was supposed to be empty. The logical side of me told myself it was just a glitch, a leftover recording from years ago, but my gut said otherwise. Against my better judgment, I walked out of the cafeteria and toward the principal's office. The air felt heavier with each step. The fluorescent lights flickered above, bathing everything in a sickly yellow glow. By the time I reached the office door, my hand was trembling. I pushed it open. The room was empty, just as I'd expected. But then I noticed something on the desk, a dusty, leather-bound yearbook. It was open to a page where a class photo had been circled in red ink. Beneath the photo, someone had scrawled one word, "Y." I recognized the face in the photo instantly. It was me. I stumbled back, my mind racing. That didn't make any sense. I had never attended Lincoln Middle. I grew up in another town entirely. My legs felt unsteady, but before I could leave, the intercom started crackling to life again. "Mr. Peters, you're not supposed to be here." The voice was closer this time, not over the intercom but directly behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The lights above the desk flickered violently, then went out, plunging the room into near darkness. I reached for my phone flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. Panic clawed at my chest. I bolted out of the office and down the hall, aiming for the exit. But no matter how far I ran, the hallway stretched endlessly ahead. The walls seemed to warp, bending inward like a funhouse. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. Then I heard it. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, and getting closer. I turned a corner and found myself back in the cafeteria. The same chair was still sitting in the middle of the room. Only now the air around it shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something rooted me in place. A figure emerged from the shimmering air. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly. Its mouth moved, but the voice wasn't its own. It was mine. "You don't remember, do you?" It rasped. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. "This is where it happened," the figure continued. "You thought you could forget, but the past doesn't stay buried." Memories I didn't recognize flooded my mind. A fight years ago between a group of students in the cafeteria. One boy shoved another too hard, and he fell. His head struck the edge of a table. Blood pooled on the tiles, seeping into the cracks. I was there. I had been the janitor then, too, but I hadn't called for help. I had panicked, cleaned up the mess, and buried the truth. I had convinced myself it was an accident, a secret I could carry to my grave. The figure stepped closer, and I saw its face clearly. It was the boy from the photo, the one who had fallen. His features twisted into a grotesque grin. "Time to clean up, Mr. Peters." He gestured to the floor, where the chair sat surrounded by bloodstains. The stains began to shift, forming words that burned into my vision. "Clean it." I dropped to my knees, scrubbing frantically as the room twisted around me. The stains wouldn't budge. The boy's voice echoed in my ears, growing louder. "Clean it." The lights exploded in a blinding flash, and everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital room, surrounded by machines beeping steadily. A nurse told me I had been found unconscious on the steps of Lincoln Middle. No one could explain how I'd gotten there or why I was clutching the yearbook. Life returned to normal, or so it seemed. But now, every time I walk past a reflective surface, I see faint smears of blood that no one else notices. I hear whispers and static whenever the TV's on, and the word why follows me everywhere. Graffiti on walls scrawled on receipts, and even spelled out in spilled coffee. The boy's gone, but his presence lingers. I feel it in every shadow, every flicker of light. The guilt I tried to bury has consumed me, and I realize now there's no running from it. It started as a stupid dare. My friends and I had been drinking and swapping ghost stories when the topic of Edison High came up. The school had been abandoned in the 90s after a fire gutted half the building. According to legend, the fire started in the principal's office, and anyone who stepped inside after dark would hear their name whispered over the intercom. I told them it was just a story and nothing more. Jamie handed me a flashlight and said I should prove it. Drunken courage led us to Edison High, the derelict school whispered about in every local ghost story. Jake smirked and asked who was going first, clearly thrilled by the dare more than the rest of us. The plan was simple. We'd walk through the halls, reach the gym, and wait. That's where people claimed the roll call happened. If it did, we'd prove it was just static or an echo. It seemed easy enough. As we crept through the corridor, the shadows seemed to ripple. Old lockers lined the walls, their doors dented and hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. Sarah whispered and asked if we could hear that. At first, I thought it was just the wind slipping through broken windows. But then I caught it a faint, rhythmic sound like footsteps trailing just behind us. I muttered for everyone to keep moving, though my voice betrayed me. We reached the gym and found it just as dilapidated as the rest of the building. The bleachers were blackened from the fire, their edges warped. Burnt remnants of basketballs were scattered across the court like ash-covered relics. We sat in silence waiting. The intercom buzzed to life. At first it was static, the garbled hum almost dismissible. Then came the voice. It said Sarah Reynolds was present. Sarah's breath hitched. She didn't respond, too paralyzed to speak. The intercom called Jacob Miles next, saying he was present. Jake's flashlight trembled in his hand. He stammered that someone had to be messing with us. Then it said my name. It said Andrew Pierce was present. My throat dried. There was no way anyone could know we were here. Then came a name none of us recognized. It said Michael Jennings was absent. The gym plunged into darkness. Jake screamed for us to run. We bolted, the flashlight beams bouncing erratically off the walls. The footsteps that had been faint earlier were now pounding, echoing louder than our own panicked sprint. Sarah shouted for us to follow her, veering toward a staircase. We barreled into a classroom on the second floor and slammed the door shut behind us. The room was stifling, the air heavy with soot. Desks and chairs were overturned, and the walls were scrawled with graffiti. Except for one section. It was clean, untouched, and bore a single sentence in neat chalk. It said only the present survives. Jake hissed and asked what that meant, his voice breaking. Before anyone could answer, the intercom buzzed again. It repeated that Michael Jennings was absent. This time the voice sounded closer, almost as if it were right outside the door. The knob rattled. I whispered for everyone to get out of the way and shoved a desk against the door. But then Sarah gasped, pointing toward the window. Across the parking lot, a single figure stood illuminated by the moonlight. He was tall, his face obscured, but the unmistakable orange glow of fire flickered around him like an aura. Sarah whispered and asked who that was. The figure raised an arm, pointing directly at us. The intercom spoke one last time. It said Sarah Reynolds was absent. Sarah screamed, her body convulsing as if something invisible had taken hold of her. Jake and I grabbed her, but it was like trying to hold onto smoke. She slipped from our grasp and crumpled to the floor, lifeless. I shouted for Jake to go and dragged him toward the window. We climbed out onto the fire escape, the metal groaning under our weight. The figure below watched silently as we descended. By the time we hit the ground, he was gone. The police found Sarah's body the next day, but they chalked it up to an accident. A group of kids trespassing, and one of them falling victim to a structural collapse. Jake and I knew the truth, but who would believe us? In the weeks that followed, we tried to move on, but something was off. At work, I'd hear my name whispered over the PA system. Jake swore he saw Sarah's face in the reflection of his rearview mirror. Then, one night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said Andrew Pierce was absent. When I got the call about the old Crestwood Academy, I was skeptical. A school abandoned since the 70s, left to rot and haunted by stories of a tragedy no one wanted to talk about. My job was simple: survey the place, check its structural integrity, and greenlight the demolition. Easy money. The building loomed as I arrived, a crumbling relic of its former self. Broken windows stared like hollow eyes, and graffiti adorned every surface. Inside, the air was stale and thick with mildew and dust. Principal Cartwright, an older man with a hunched back, met me in the main hallway. Careful around the basement, he warned, his voice trembling slightly. It's not safe down there. I nodded, but didn't think much of it. I dealt with plenty of basements. How bad could this one be? The upper floors were routine cracked beams, sagging ceilings, and a raccoon that skittered off as I approached. Then I found the basement door, tucked away behind the cafeteria. Rusted hinges groaned as I pried it open. A gust of cold air hit me, and the darkness beyond swallowed my flashlight beam. Something about the stillness gave me pause, but I shook it off and started down the stairs. The basement was larger than I expected. Rows of columns supported the low ceiling, their surfaces cracked and stained. Along one wall, faint etchings caught my eye, names. Hundreds of them scratched into the concrete like tally marks. Some were crossed out, others circled. Just kids messing around, I muttered, but my voice sounded hollow against the oppressive silence. As I moved deeper, I noticed objects scattered across the floor: a child's shoe, a rusted ruler, and a melted lunchbox. They seemed out of place, like artifacts from a forgotten time. The tapping started faintly. At first, I thought it was dripping water, but the rhythm was too deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I swung my flashlight around, my heart racing. The sound echoed, impossible to pinpoint. Then came the whispers. They were soft and fragmented, like someone speaking just out of earshot. Help. One word reached me, so faint I wasn't sure I'd heard it. I turned back toward the stairs, suddenly eager to leave, but froze. A shadow moved across the wall. Long and distorted, but with no source. Is someone down here? I called, my voice cracking. The whisper stopped. As I stood frozen in the basement, the weight of what I had just seen settled on me. The shadowy figures moved too fast, too erratically, to be human. My breath came in shallow gasps, my body stiff with the cold that had seeped into my bones the moment I entered the basement. I hurried to the stairs, but something glinted on the wall beside me. More names, freshly scratched into the concrete. My flashlight trembled as I read the latest edition Michael Porter. That was me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the freshly scratched name, my name. On the wall, the word absent taunting me. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I needed to leave. I needed to escape. But my legs wouldn't move, frozen in place by a force I couldn't see or understand. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the figures move toward me. Its movements jerky, like it was caught in some glitch of reality. My breath caught in my throat as it stopped just inches from me. A cold, hollow gaze met mine from within the depths of its dark, featureless face. It didn't speak, but its finger slowly pointed at the wall where my name was etched. Absent, it whispered. the sound like dry leaves scraping across the floor. In that moment, I understood this was no mere haunting. The basement wasn't just a storage place for forgotten artifacts. It was a prison, a place where memories and souls were trapped, demanding attention, demanding release. Suddenly, everything shifted. The tapping became a chaotic symphony of raps and knocks. The figures, once still and passive, now moved with purpose, closing in on me. I stumbled back, my hands flailing for something to grip. My flashlight flickered wildly, casting long shadows on the walls that seemed to twist and distort, mocking me. In a panic, I turned and ran. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible, dodging between columns, the shadows clawing at my heels. The basement door loomed ahead, but with each step the temperature dropped further. My breath came out in clouds of steam, yet my skin felt like ice. I reached the stairs and scrambled up them, my hands slipping against the rail as I clawed my way upward. The door to the basement slammed behind me with a finality that reverberated through the halls. The tapping stopped, but the feeling of being hunted didn't. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for breath under the fading light of dusk. My heart raced, and the air tasted metallic, like the remnants of a nightmare I couldn't shake. As I stood there catching my breath, I realized the truth: the basement wasn't just haunted by the spirits of the past. It was feeding on something far darker, and it wasn't done with me yet. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Before I could process it, the tapping resumed, louder this time, like knuckles rapping against the stone. The shadows thickened, coalescing into shapes, figures that moved with jerky, unnatural motions. I backed away, but they surrounded me, their whispers turning to angry murmurs. One leaned closer, its face a dark void, and pointed to the wall. Etched beneath my name was a single word: absent. Adrenaline surged. I bolted for the stairs, dodging the shadowy forms as they lunged. The tapping followed me, relentless, even as I burst into the cafeteria and slammed the basement door behind me. The principal was gone, and the building was eerily silent. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for air. I reported the incident to the demolition crew the next morning, leaving out the supernatural details, but when they went to check the basement, they refused to enter, claiming the air was too cold, the walls too strange. The demolition was postponed indefinitely. Weeks passed, but the basement stayed with me. I started hearing tapping in my dreams, the rhythm identical to what I'd heard that night. It followed me to work, to the store, and even to the shower. One night, I woke to find my name scratched into the plaster of my bedroom wall. Beneath it, just like in the basement, absent. In the days that followed, I tried to go on with my life. I told myself I had imagined it all, but deep down, I knew I wasn't the only one who had heard the tapping. And I knew, I couldn't shake the feeling, that the basement's grip on me was only growing stronger. The shadows haven't appeared again, but the tapping persists, growing louder each day. And somewhere deep down, I know Crestwood Academy isn't done with me. We always said we'd go back to the school someday, but I never thought it would feel this heavy. Crestwood High, now crumbling and silent, stood like a forgotten monument to our childhood. I stood with Ella, Sam, and Marcus at the gate, our reunion tense and awkward. The school looked smaller somehow. The demolition was scheduled for a week away, so Marcus, ever the instigator, convinced us to take this trip down memory lane. But it wasn't nostalgia that brought us back. It was the unspoken promise. Inside, the air was damp and thick with mildew, the smell almost enough to make me turn back. Sam muttered that the place smelled like death, kicking a shard of broken glass as we moved forward. We hesitated at the entrance to the auditorium, the weight of the past pulling at us. The doors groaned open, revealing rows of decayed seats facing a stage cloaked in shadows. Dust motes floated in the dim light, spilling through shattered windows, but the air was heavy with something else, a tension, almost alive. At the center of the stage was a single desk and chair, eerily pristine despite the decay surrounding it. Behind it, scrawled in jagged chalk across the warped blackboard, were 3 chilling words: "Tell the truth." Marcus whispered and asked what the hell it was, stepping forward. His voice echoed, swallowed by the vast emptiness. Before anyone could answer, the loudspeakers crackled to life. A distorted version of our song began playing, the one we'd performed together during the spring assembly in our senior year. I hadn't thought about that song in years, but hearing it now sent chills down my spine. It wasn't nostalgic, it was mocking. Ella shouted for someone to turn it off, but none of us moved. The melody hung in the air, warped and out of sync, like it was taunting us. Then came the voice. It drawled out our names slowly and deliberately: Danny, Ella, Marcus, Sam. It asked if we remembered it. It was Mr. Harlow. His voice, distorted but unmistakable, filled the auditorium, sending a wave of nausea through me. Sam stammered that it wasn't real, backing away and saying it had to be some kind of prank. But then the shadows moved. In the periphery of the stage, figures began to emerge, indistinct at first, but growing clearer with each passing second. They were us, teenage versions of ourselves, sitting in the audience. They stared up at the stage, their faces twisted into cruel smiles. They clapped rhythmically, the sound thunderous in the silence. The voice repeated its demand, telling us to tell the truth. The chalkboard seemed to glow, pulsing with an unearthly light. It warned us that if we didn't, they would. I felt something in my chest crack open, a dam holding back years of guilt. I blurted out that it was an accident and that we didn't mean for it to happen. Ella turned to me, her face pale. She told me to stop, but it was too late. The words spilled out. I said that night, after the spring assembly, we snuck into the auditorium. We were drinking and messing around. Marcus shouted for me to stop, his fists clenched, saying I didn't have to say anything. I pointed at him, my voice rising, and said that Mr. Harlow caught us and tried to stop us. I said Marcus shoved him, that he hit his head on the stage, and that we ran. We left him there. The air seemed to freeze. The shadows stopped moving. The teenage versions of us in the audience looked up, their smiles fading into blank stares. Mr. Harlow's voice boomed from the speakers, saying our guilt was louder than our lies. He told us to finish it. Sam stepped forward, his voice shaking. He said we thought Mr. Harlow would be fine, that we didn't check, didn't call for help, and just left him there. The confession hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The teenage shadows dissolved, replaced by a single figure standing at the back of the auditorium. It was him, Mr. Harlow. His form flickered like an old film reel, his eyes burning with a light that wasn't human. He said he waited for years, stepping closer, his voice softer now but no less menacing. He said he had waited for us to return, and now we were here. The auditorium began to tremble, the walls groaning as if alive. The desk on the stage cracked, splitting in two. The shadows surged forward, circling us like a vortex. Ella screamed and asked what he wanted. He whispered one word: justice. His voice echoed in our minds. We were forced to our knees, the weight of his presence crushing. I choked out that we were sorry, tears streaming down my face. I begged, saying we were kids and didn't know what we were doing. He interrupted, his voice eerily calm, saying we knew, but that fear was greater than our humanity. The shadows closed in, suffocating us. Just when I thought we'd be swallowed whole, Mr. Harlow's form flickered and dimmed. The shadows receded, leaving us gasping on the cold stage floor. The chalkboard now read, "You may leave, but never forget." A chill shot through my spine. The doors slammed shut behind us, locking with an audible click. A high-pitched laugh erupted from the loudspeakers, echoing mockingly through the space. Before we could react, Ella gasped, clutching her throat. Her face contorted, and her eyes widened in terror. She dropped to her knees, whispering that it wasn't fair. Shadowy tendrils wrapped around her, pulling her back toward the stage. Marcus shouted her name, running toward her, but it was like an invisible wall held him back. We watched, helpless, as Ella's body flickered, phasing in and out of sight until she was gone. Her voice echoed faintly from the speakers, but it wasn't her anymore. It was hollow, robotic, and chillingly devoid of emotion. It said one must remain. The others may go. A loud gong reverberated through the room, and the chalkboard flickered again. It read choose. In the panic that followed, we realized what it meant. One of us would have to stay, trapped with Mr. Harlow forever. The shadows began circling, growing closer with every second. Arguments erupted, accusations flying. Finally, Marcus screamed for them to take him. He shouted that he would stay, and the tendrils enveloped him. His screams echoed until they were replaced by silence. The doors unlocked. Sam and I stumbled outside, but the night didn't feel like freedom. As we ran, the school loomed behind us, its windows glowing faintly with an ominous red light. Days later, I received a call. Sam was gone. No explanation, no trace. On my bedroom wall, freshly etched in jagged letters, was a single phrase: "You're next." There was something.